I work at a state prison. Which one doesn't really matter. I enjoy my job there, despite being surrounded by rapists and murderers all day. Believe it or not, most of the time it was quite peaceful there. One night shift, me and a colleague got assigned a cleaning up duty in cell 515. Some old fucked up murderer had offed himself in his cell. Our duty was to pack up his belongings and pretty much burn it, since he had no relatives or anyone who would be interested in his stuff. That's when I saw a notebook. And on the front page it said, "A serial killer's memoirs." I couldn't help myself but to wonder what this twisted murderer had been scribbling down. So, when my colleague wasn't looking, I shoved it down my pocket and took it home. What I read made my blood run cold. So, here it is. A serial killer's memoirs. I always knew I was different. Not in the way some people feel they don't fit in, but in a deeper, darker way. Life was like a black and white movie, dull and unexciting. Until that night when everything changed. It was an accident, really. I didn't plan to kill him, but when it happened, something inside me woke up. It was like I'd been walking through a fog and suddenly it lifted. That moment when his breath hitched, caught by surprise, I felt alive. The fear in his eyes, it was electrifying. I can still see it now, the way his eyes widened, realizing what was happening. I didn't mean to do it at first. Some homeless hobo shouting profanities at me as I walked by, and then it got heated. I remember my hands shaking with a mix of rage and something else. Excitement, maybe. I lunged at him, my fists hitting his face in a dark, twisted rhythm over and over and over again. My hands throbbing, and then he stopped moving. He didn't get up. He was dead. Standing over him, I felt a rush, my hands aching with the pain where his teeth had pierced my skin. It was horrifying but invigorating. His last breath was a soft sigh, almost like a release, and in that moment, I felt a release too. A release from the mundane, the ordinary, the blandness of everyday life. It was like tasting color in a world that has always been grey. The moment was brief, but it changed everything. I stood there, looking down at him, and I didn't feel guilt or fear. I felt powerful, a smile spreading across my face. It was as if I had discovered a hidden part of myself, a part that was more real than anything I had ever experienced. I remember how my hands trembled, not with fear, but with a newfound sense of purpose. I looked around, making sure I was alone. The alley was dark, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp, casting long shadows, hiding us from the world. I knelt beside him, my hands touching his. They were still warm. It was surreal, feeling the life that had just left his body. My heart was racing, not from panic, but from something akin to joy. It was wrong, I knew that, but it felt so right. Then I noticed his watch, a simple, cheap thing. It was shining under the dim light. Without really thinking, I took it off his wrist. It felt like a trophy, a memento of this momentous occasion. I slipped it into my pocket, a secret I could keep with me. I left the alley, my steps light, my heart still racing. The night air felt fresher, the city sounds more alive. I walked home, the watch pressing against my thigh, a constant reminder of what I'd done. At home, I sat in the dark, rolling the watch between my fingers. It was more than just an object. It was a symbol of my awakening. I realized I'd been sleepwalking through life. Now, I was awake. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. Work, conversations, and daily routines, they all seemed meaningless now. My mind kept drifting back to the alley, to the fear in his eyes, to the feeling of being truly alive. I knew I couldn't do it again. It was too risky, too insane, but the thought was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. The thrill of the hunt, the power over life and death. It was intoxicating. I started planning, thinking about how I could do it again, but safer, smarter. I would choose someone at random, someone with no connection to me. I would be careful, leave no traces. The anticipation was almost as thrilling as the act itself. I would wander the streets at night, watching, waiting. The city was full of potential, full of life just waiting to be extinguished. I decided I would take a trophy from each one, something to remember them by. It would be my secret collection, a tangible reminder of the power I held. The thought of it filled me with a sense of purpose I had never known. I was no longer just a face in the crowd, no longer just going through motions. I was something more, something greater. I was chosen. As I prepared for my next kill, I felt a sense of excitement I had never known. It was like I was truly living for the first time. I was awake, and I never wanted to go back to sleep. The first time was an accident. The second time was a choice, a conscious, deliberate choice. I remember how my heart pounded as I walked the streets at night, searching. I was no longer a passive observer in life. I was an active participant, a predator. I chose her, Emma, a small, beautiful woman in her early 20s, because she was alone and she looked breakable. There was a certain vulnerability about her that drew me in. It was in the park, late at night. She was sitting on a bench, lost in thought. I sat down beside her, trying to look harmless, lost. We talked for a bit. She told me her boyfriend had just broken up with her. Poor soul. Perhaps I was just about to do her a favor, to end her suffering. She was kind, too kind. And when the moment was right, when I knew we were alone, I struck. I stood up in front of her, grabbed her by the neck, pulled her closer and shoved a knife deep into her abdomen. It slid in easier than I had anticipated. After all, this was the first time I had deliberately killed someone. I stared deep into her eyes, the blood running thick over my hand. I wanted to see the moment when the light left her eyes. The fear in her eyes was different from the previous one. It was mixed with disbelief, a silent plea for mercy. It made me feel powerful, in control. The moment her last breath brushed against my face, the moment of utter silence, it was euphoric. Her fear so sweet I could almost taste it. I took a necklace she was wearing. It was cheap, but it glittered in the moonlight. Another trophy. Each time was different, yet each time brought the same rush, the same feeling of aliveness. I started planning more, getting smarter about my choices. Men, women, old, young, it didn't matter to me. They were all just a means to an end. Each one gave me that rush, the exquisite sense of control. The trophies became my secret collection, my most prized possessions. Each one was a memory, a life that I'd taken. I kept them hidden, but sometimes I would take them out and relive the moments. The fear, the power, the release. It was intoxicating. I justified my actions to myself. I was doing the world a favor, removing the unworthy, the weak. I was a god, deciding who got to live and who didn't. The power was addictive. I was reshaping the world one life at a time. But with each kill, the paranoia grew. I started seeing police everywhere. Every siren was for me, every glance suspicious. I knew I had to be careful, to not get too confident. But the thrill, the need, it was too strong. I became obsessed with finding the perfect trophy, something that would symbolize my power, my superiority. It had to be unique, something that would stand out in my collection. I spent nights thinking about it, planning it. It consumed me. I chose my next victim carefully. He was strong, confident, someone who thought he was untouchable. I yearned to see that confidence shatter, to see fear replace it. And when it did, it was better than anything I could have ever imagined. I took his watch, a fancy, expensive one. It was my crowning trophy. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The urge, the need, it kept growing. Each kill was a high, but it wore off too quickly. I needed more, always more. I started taking risks, getting bolder. The fear of getting caught was a part of the thrill now. I was playing a game, and I was winning. But one mistake, one slip, and it would all be over. I started seeing them in my dreams, the people of the lives I'd taken, their faces, their last moments. They were haunting me, but I couldn't stop. The need was too deep, too much a part of me now. I realized I was losing myself, becoming something else, but I didn't care. This was who I was meant to be, a hunter, a collector of lives. I was shaping the world, one life at a time. The nights became my refuge, my playground. The city was full of prey, full of opportunities. I was no longer just a killer. I was an artist, and death was my medium. As I prepared for my next kill, I felt that same familiar rush of excitement, of anticipation. I was alive, more alive than anyone else, and I was ready to claim my next trophy. After many nights, the kills started to blend together. The faces, the screams, their final breaths, they were all becoming a blur. But I couldn't stop. It was like a hunger that never got satisfied, always gnawing at me, pushing me to go further, to do more. Then came the night that changed everything. I had chosen her, Rebecca, because she reminded me of someone I used to know, someone from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Who knows? Maybe I did know her once. It doesn't matter now. She had the same smile, the same laugh. It was supposed to be just another hunt, but it wasn't. This one was personal. We met at a bar. She was laughing, carefree. I watched her for a while, feeling that familiar itch, that need. I approached her, struck up a conversation. She was easy to talk to, easy to lure away. We flirted, we laughed, we drank. She wanted to come home with me for the night. They were always so easy to manipulate. We were walking in the middle of the night, and that's when I made my move. But she fought back, harder than I expected. There was a struggle, and for a moment I thought she might get away, but she didn't. I was stronger, more determined. When it was done, when her body lay still, I felt a rush like never before. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. I took a bracelet from her wrist, another trophy, but as I turned to leave, I heard a noise. Footsteps. Someone had seen me. I ran, faster than I ever had, my heart pounding in my chest. I had been careful, always so careful, but this time I had slipped. I had let the thrill overtake caution. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and fear. I kept thinking about that night, wondering if I had left any clues, if the witness could identify me. The trophies that had brought me so much joy now felt like a burden, a reminder of my potential downfall. I knew I had to be more careful, to lay low for a while, but the urge was still there, burning inside me. I started planning my next kill, the one that would be my masterpiece. I wanted it to be perfect, the ultimate trophy. I chose him, Arthur, because he was everything I wasn't: popular, successful, loved. I watched him for weeks, learning his routine, waiting for the perfect moment. And when the time came, it was everything I had hoped for. The fear in his eyes. It was the sweetest fear I had ever seen. I could taste the fear in his eyes. The power I felt was intoxicating. And when it was over, when his lifeless body lay at my feet, I felt a sense of satisfaction that I'd never known. I took his ring, a symbol of his success, his life. It was the perfect trophy, the one I had been waiting for. But as I looked at it, something felt different. It wasn't the thrill I had expected. It was emptiness, a hollow feeling that left me cold. I realized then that it would never be enough. No matter how many I killed, no matter how many trophies I took, it would never fill the void inside me. I had been chasing a feeling that didn't exist. a satisfaction that was always just out of reach. But I couldn't stop. The need was too deep, too much a part of me. I was trapped in a cycle of hunting and killing, a cycle I knew would eventually lead to my end. The night became my enemy, filled with shadows and whispers. I started seeing faces in the dark, the faces of those I had taken. They were haunting me, their eyes accusing, their voices echoing in my mind. I knew I was losing control, slipping further into madness. But there was no turning back. This was who I was, who I had become. A hunter, a killer, a god. As I prepared for my next kill, I felt a sense of dread that I'd never known. I was no longer the predator. I was the prey, hunted by my own demons, my own past. But the urge was still there, pushing me forward, driving me into the darkness. I knew it was only a matter of time before I was caught, before my world came crashing down. But until then, I would keep hunting, keep collecting. It was the only thing I knew, the only thing that made me feel alive. The game was coming to an end. I could feel it in my bones. The streets that once offered me cover now felt like a trap, closing in on me with every step. The faces in the crowd seemed to stare a little longer, a little harder. Paranoia became a constant companion, whispering of my imminent downfall. The urge, the insatiable hunger, wouldn't let me rest. It pushed me, drove me to keep going, to take one more life, to claim one more trophy. It was a vicious cycle, one I couldn't break free from, nor did I want to. I chose my next target with care. Sarah, a bartender. She was different, special somehow. She had a presence that stood out in the sea of faceless people. I watched her, studied her, imagined what her fear would look like, what her last breath would sound like, just like I had with so many others. The night I chose to strike was dark, the moon hidden behind clouds. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. I followed her when her shift ended, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear this time. When I made my move, it was quick. I had perfected my technique, honed my skills over countless nights. But she was not like the others. She fought back with a ferocity that took me by surprise. It was a struggle, a dance of death under the starless sky. In the end, I was victorious. But as I stood over her body, something felt different. The rush was there, but it was muted, overshadowed by a sense of emptiness. I took her locket, a small, delicate thing, holding it in my hands, my final trophy. But as I turned to leave, I heard footsteps, shouts, sirens. The police had been closing in, and I had been too caught up in the hunt to notice. I ran, but it was no use. They were everywhere, closing in from all sides. I was trapped, a rat in a maze with no way out. I could hear my own breath, ragged and desperate. My mind raced, looking for an escape, but there was none. This was it, the end of my line. They found me in an alley, the same kind of place where it all started. It was poetic in a way, a circle closing. The officers shouted, guns drawn, but I barely heard them. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat, loud in my ears. I thought about running, about fighting, but what was the point? The game was over, and I had lost. I dropped the locket, my final trophy, and raised my hands. The arrest was a blur. Handcuffs, flashing lights, people shouting. I was a ghost, watching it all happen to someone else. They took me away, read me my rights, but I hardly listened. It didn't matter. Nothing did anymore. In the interrogation room, they asked me questions, but I didn't have the answers they wanted. How could I explain the unexplainable? How could I make them understand the need, the hunger, the rush? How could I make them understand that I was chosen to make this world a better place? They showed me pictures of my victims and asked me why I did it. I looked at their faces, the faces I had chosen, and felt nothing. They were just trophies, nothing more. I had thought they made me feel alive, but I'd been wrong. They were just reminders of the emptiness inside me. I didn't bother to defend myself at the trial. What was the point? The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict a foregone conclusion. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced me to life without parole, and I accepted it with a numb indifference. In my cell, I thought about the path that had led me here. Every choice, every kill, every trophy, it all seemed so pointless now. I'd been chasing a feeling that didn't exist, a satisfaction that was always just out of reach. I hear the voices of the people whose life I'd put out like a candle in a dimly lit room. They whisper to me in the dark, their words a constant reminder of what I'd done. I don't try to silence them anymore. They're a part of me now, just like the hunger, the urge. But it's over now. The game, the hunt, the kills. All that's left is the memory, the ghosts of what I've done. I live with them every day, a constant reminder of the monster I became. I don't know why I did it, why I couldn't stop. Maybe I was broken. Maybe I was born this way, or maybe I was chosen. It doesn't really matter now. All that matters is the end. This is my legacy, my story, a tale of darkness, of a hunger that couldn't be sated. I was a hunter, a killer, a collector of lives. But in the end, I was just a man, alone in the dark with his demons. And that's how it'll end. Not with a bang, but with a whisper, a quiet surrender to the inevitable. This is my story, and this is how it ends. Now, I will join them in death.